In this video, I'm going to show you how to service the all-wheel drive system on your E46 BMW. Quick note, I unfortunately lost the audio to the first half of this video, so there will be some voiceover and then the regular audio will pick back up later on. Feel free to pause the video right here to get the oil type, quantity, torque specs, part numbers, and the tools needed to do this job. So this green arrow is pointing to your fill plug. You're going to want to loosen that first before loosening your drain plug, because there's nothing worse than draining all your old oil and not being able to put oil back in. This right here, the blue arrow, is your drain plug. Once you've got the fill plug loosened, go ahead and loosen that drain plug all the way out, drain that oil out, and then you'll need to use some sort of pump system to pump the new gear oil back into the differential. I had video of that. That video got corrupted, unfortunately, as well, but I will be showing that pump later on in the video when I do the front diff. The front differential service is done in the exact same way as the rear differential service, and feel free to pause the video so you can get this information as well. First up is to remove the fill plug from the front differential, and then I'm going to go ahead and remove the drain plug from the differential, and then just let that drain out on its own. It'll take a little bit of time and it won't smell very good, but you're gonna get through it. Now that it's done draining, I'm gonna go ahead and put the drain plug back in, snug that up. We'll come back with the torque wrench and give that a final tightening, but just so it stops dripping on the floor. And then we're gonna take our pump assembly that I mentioned earlier, and you can also use a long tube and just hold the bottle up vertically up in the wheel well for the front. But this is the pump that you would need to do the rear diff that I mentioned earlier. Normally it doesn't leak like that, mine's a little broken, but go ahead and snug up that fill plug. And then once we've got both the fill and the drain plug snugged up, we'll come back with the torque wrench. We're going to torque these to the torque specs given. I believe it's 48 foot-pounds. Torque specs given at the front of this chapter. Moving on to the transmission and the transfer case. They're both easy. They use a different type of fluid than the differentials. And the transmission has 17 millimeter drain plugs, while the transfer case has 16 millimeters on this car. It may be different on your vehicle. I'm going to remove this underbelly tray. On this car, there's a couple screws missing, so there's a couple zip ties we have to cut. And then remove these 3 Phillips head, and that just comes out easy. Move that out of the way. Now this right here that I'm pointing to is the fill plug on the side, the passenger side of the transmission. And then this is the drain plug right here for the transmission. This is the drain for the transfer case, and then the drain for the fill for the transfer case is right here. And it is not much fluid that goes in this transfer case. I believe it's 0.16 liters. As you can see, the drain plug and the fill plug are almost in line. So I went ahead and broke the fill plug loose on the transmission, and now I'm going ahead and removing the drain plug. And all these drain plugs, you do not want to over tighten them. They are taper fit threads. If you over tighten them, you will crack your case. So once that drain plug's out, I'm just going to go ahead and let that drain. Once that's done draining, we'll go ahead and snug that drain plug back up so it stops draining on the floor. Moving over to the transfer case. Let that drain out. This stuff smells terrible. Your shop will smell terrible for a while. Alright, just putting the transfer case drain plug back in, snug that up. Not going crazy with the impact. Do not go crazy with the impact. Now I'm using that same pump. Just got all the differential oil out of that pump tube, so we're not pumping differential oil into the transmission. Probably wouldn't hurt anything, but just to be on the safe side. Once you see the oil start to pour back out the fill port, you know that you've got enough in it. Go ahead and put the fill plug back in, torque that back to spec. Go ahead and torque the drain plug at that point, and then we'll move over to the transfer case. So like I said, it's the same fluid for the transfer case as it is for the transmission, just a lot less of it. If you're also replacing your CV boots, you need to do that before you do the front differential fluid, as you will lose some fluid when you remove the axles. All right, last step, we're going to be changing out the CV boots in the front. The rear wheel drive guys don't have to deal with this, but front CVs, they have to turn as well as transmit power. So they're more likely to split these outer boots since they're not only articulating up and down, but they're also articulating side to side. So to do this, we've got a 19mm nut that we gotta remove here for the lower ball joint. We gotta get that separated. And then we have a 36mm 12 point out here that we gotta remove. Tool for that, we're gonna be using big Milwaukee. That should get the job done pretty easy. These are staked, but this would break the staking on the nut anyway. No problem. All right, so now that the nut, the 36mm axle nut is out, we need to work on getting this out. And sometimes it helps to tap the axle back towards the transmission or the differential a little bit to get the CV housing away from this nut. Sometimes it's hard to get socket on there. There's not enough clearance. So what I'm gonna do is actually I'm gonna tap the outside of the axle, push the axle this way. Hopefully will give me enough room to get a wrench on there. It's never a bad idea to put the nut back on the axle so that way you don't accidentally hit the threads. You don't want to hammer on the nut itself. You want to hammer in the middle of the axle. But the nut being on there will protect the thread from being galled up. Alright. You won't be able to get the axle out while that ball joint's still in. You can tap it a little bit. Bottoms out. You don't want to hammer on it too hard because it will only go on a certain amount before it starts bottoming out the joints. And if you're just trying to fight that, you're just wasting your time. But now we've got enough room over here, hopefully, to slip the box end on our nut. If I remember correctly, you got a little bit more room on this side. Like that loose. These are only torqued to, I believe, 42 foot-pounds. Nothing crazy. One thing you don't want to do is you don't want to take it all the way out the box end because you will get to a point where you can't get the box end out from around the CV. So once it gets about halfway up, switch to the open end so you don't get yourself trapped and have to wind the nut back down just to be able to get the wrench. That's loose. Can't get the nut out until the ball joint drops. So get the ball joint out. Sometimes you get lucky and you just tap it with the hammer and it drops out. Sometimes you gotta use a little heat. Some people will use a ball joint spreader or pickle fork. Whatever your favorite flavor of ball joint removal is. There we go. So now that this is loose in the hub, this is dropped down, we can go ahead and pull the axle all the way out of the spindle, and then we're going to come back and we're going to tap the axle out of the diff. Sometimes you need two people for this, just to be able to hold the spindle out far enough to get the axle out. Sometimes you get lucky and you just tap it out. There we go. Really, we need that axle this way, towards the rear of the car. And this boot is already torn, so I can actually go ahead and take that out. We'll get the cup out of the transmission. That's what's down up in the differential. I'd like to take the back end of my extension with the flat surface and just put that. There's like 6 corners on the axle cup itself. If you get one of those against the extension, so I was just tapping on this little surface right here. This is just paint. That little surface right there, there's 6 of them. It's held in with a little retention clip. Some kits will come with a new clip for the axle. Some won't. Alright, so this is the end of the axle that goes into the differential. On the end here, we've got a little clip. These will fall off if you hit them too hard, so we don't want them to go flying. We just want them to stay where they are. But there's a little split ring, or a little clip. Set of pliers for that. Probably want to wear some safety glasses for this. Sometimes they go flying. That's all it is. Don't forget that, put that back on. Don't ask me how I know. You will have to take the whole thing apart again. In a perfect world, we'll just be able to chisel it off, tap it lightly with this, and have it pop off. But that's not how it actually happens. Not making any progress, so I'm gonna try adding a little bit of heat, try to get that moving free. Try to clean as much of this grease off as I can. You want to get as much of the old grease off as you can, so that way the fresh grease has an easier time getting where it needs to go. Then also I don't feel like smelling the burning grease once I use the torch. Every time. A puller would really be ideal, but I don't have one of those. And actually, I'm gonna go ahead and cut this boot off to make that easier on me as well. This boot is like plastic, it's so old. Alright, that's off. I do them from that end, you can do them from the other end. The other end of the ball joint is kind of more of a pain sometimes to get back together with all the balls. So, that clamped in the vise. These boot clamps cut off. Take it out of the vise. Gloves are pretty necessary because these things are just messy. The grease stinks. It's not something you want to deal with. Just get a set of old gloves, and when you're done, toss them. So, gonna go ahead and get this cleaned out with some paper towels, pack it full of fresh grease, clean the other one off, get it packed full of fresh grease, slip the new boots back on, and then I'll come back and I'll show you how to clamp the clamps. All right, now we're gonna go ahead, have those cleaned up. All right, then we take our boot, slide it over. Some people will have a tool that they can actually spread the boot out and slip it over the CV. I don't have that tool. Sometimes it's a cone, sometimes it's actual spreaders. I just pop the inner joint out, and then I don't have to worry about overstretching the boots or anything like that. All right, so once that's nicely in its groove, these, which are Oetiker clamp pliers, they just slip on this little triangle right here, and they squeeze it from both sides. And you want to make sure that's, actually, I want to go ahead and wipe any excess grease off that so it doesn't slip. Do this side too. Really want a good grip on that stainless so it clamps nicely. Alright. Perfect. So we're just going to slip this down. Put it over the boot. Get the boot in the right section. There's a little recess for it. Put that right there. on it nice. Perfect. Alright. Squish it back flat. Just slice the end off with the razor. Squirt most of it in there. We're going to want to put some on this joint. We're going to put a little bit up here on the splines. Alright, so that's cleaned up. Clean this off. Slip our new boot on. That's going to slide all the way. There's a couple ribs right here. You're going to want to slide that all the way up to there. But really for this part, you can just slide it past. All right, so now that that's back on, we're going to take our tapered side, put it this way. And then I actually had a 30mm socket, which seemed to fit quite nice. You hear the sound change, you know you're bottomed out. So like I said in the beginning, you don't want to forget your little split ring, so we're going to put that back on. There's a little groove on the end of the axle that lives in to keep this joint from pulling out. Easy money. All right. So now, this is all back together. We want to take what's left in this bag that we saved, a little bit that we saved. This has got all of our new grease in it, and that'll work its way around first time you drive it. We don't want this to fall back apart, so I'm gonna go ahead and actually this point's a little annoying to do, so we'll come back once I've got it done. As you can tell by the table, this job is a messy one, but not hard to do. It takes just a couple special tools, and I'll put a link to all the tools I use in the description. But you can see here, the top axle is actually the passenger side. It has that second section of stub axle that goes through the oil pan to hit the differential on the driver's side. So you can't get them mixed up, so if you take them both out, you don't have to worry about keeping them separate or anything. Put them back in, it's really easy. They have these clips. That clip is all that holds it in the transmission, just a little retention clip. So you literally just pop them back in. A little bit of light force should get them to clip in. You want to make sure that they're all the way seated in the transmission, and I'll show you what that looks like once I get it done. Easy, simple. Once you get the differential side in, pop the output side back into the wheel hub, put your 19mm ball joint back on, put your 36mm axle nut back on, and you're done. You don't have to redo an alignment or anything because you're not changing alignment by just loosening a ball joint. So as long as you didn't have any alignment issues before, you won't have any now. Simple job, pretty easy to do, and it'll extend the life of your axles. You do not want to drive around with torn axle boots, letting the dirt get in there and tear these joints up. Aftermarket axles usually are not the same quality as OEM ones, so if you can save your OEM joints, do it. I don't know if you could tell, but the oil level comes right up to the outlet of where the axle seals are. You can see where it's in line with the fill port actually. So I went ahead and did the differential fluid already, forgetting that when you pull the axles out, a little bit drips out. So once I get the axles back in, I'm gonna have to pull the fill plug back out a little and pump a couple more squirts of oil back in there just to bring the oil level back up to the right spot. Let's see, we go up in here. If you move the spindle out of your way, you can get it in there. And then you can slip that end. Spindle. And you might think that's all the way in, but I'll show you what that looks like. right up in there, that is the mating flange, if I can get it to focus, of the CV to the different. There's still a gap right here. That's the gap we gotta close up. You can just push it in by hand. That was it. That's all it took. Just a little bit of wiggling. We're hitting on the ball joint that's preventing us from getting the axle to stick through. So we have to clean these rotors off afterwards because they've got some greasy handprints on them. It's just part of the job. It's a little percussive persuasion. Once you get it stuck through enough that you can spin the nut back on there a couple turns, you can just pull it through the rest of the way by tightening the nut. So I made the mistake of not ordering new axle nuts for this. But what you can do is you can just, if you were in that situation, you can just swap them from driver's side to passenger side. And then normally the stakes won't line up again. And see, we've got fresh material, we can restake that one, it'll be fine. I don't think you'll be able to see this one, but it also didn't line up. So we'll be able to restake that one just fine. Chisel, come up in here. And she's done. Get the brake disc cleaned up, get the wheel put back on. The torque specs for all this, the axle nut is 214 foot-pounds. The lug nuts are 87 foot-pounds, and the lower ball joint is 48 foot-pounds. So once you've got all that done, staking the axle nut out here, I'm gonna go back under the car, pop the ball joint back in, and I'll wedge it up with the piece of wood and get that tightened. Now I know I said that the torque spec on these is 48 foot-pounds. It's pretty hard to torque a nut with an open-ended wrench. So just make sure you get them tight, I guess. To get this to stay up where it needs to be, like I said, just a piece of wood. That's all you need right there. Once you get that snug, you can get rid of the board. There we go. That should be good. Now I'm gonna go ahead and I'm gonna put more oil back in this, put the wheels, clean the brakes, put the wheels back on. I already did the passenger side off camera. And then I gotta put the underbelly tray back on. And it's a test drive for that.